Hey guys, good to have you here. So let's start with introduction. Please introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about what you do.
Sure. Start from here, maybe. I'm Jeremy Lam. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Pixio, a Hong Kong mobile studios company. We've been founded for 3 years, and we launched 6 games so far.
And I'm Howard Lau. I'm a co-founder and CEO of Twitchy Games. We're also Hong Kong-based, mobile and publishing studio. So we've been around for 6 years. We launched 4 games. Yeah, great.
Hi everyone. So my name is Zhang. I'm a senior revenue analyst from Google in Beijing. So my focus is mobile gaming, supporting large publishers, large partnerships. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Chris Natsuume. I'm the creative director of Boomzap. We're about 16 years old. We've published, I think, 56 games. We're in Southeast Asia. We're headquartered in Singapore.
And my name is Kaveh. I'm founder and CEO of RiseAngle. We are a VR and AR games company. We have released 4 games to the market so far. And we have a lot of questions for you guys. For the first one, I would like all of you to pitch in, but I mean for the next ones, feel free, whatever you're more comfortable, just jump in and respond. So we have a great diverse panel, and then actually track is West meets East, so which is great. So the countries that you're currently focusing on, how is the development and publishing environment in those countries on a high level, especially that we have distinguished panel from different countries?
We publish mainly, if you're counting UA efforts, then we're mainly focused on the US and English-speaking countries, but we develop our games here in Hong Kong, so I think it's 2 separate things. I'll talk a bit about like publishing in US and a bit about developing in Hong Kong. Publishing in US-wise, our efforts not that big. We purchased around 1 million paid downloads in the past like 1 or 2 years or so. So we're like a really small publisher. But I think in terms of, it's very robust, it's very developed. You have Facebook, you have Google Ads, and a lot of other studios. The users are very high quality. It's very easy to get, and it's less complicated than, say, China Android, for example. It's very transparent and very easy to publish there. And in terms of development in Hong Kong, I think the talent pool is still kind of, I wouldn't say lacking, but it's kind of scattered. There's a lot of studios, but then they're all really small studios in Hong Kong. Not a lot of big publishers here, only a couple. But then I think it's starting to mature in the past like 2-3 years or so. We're seeing like more of these events. We're seeing more meetups from the developers, more games being launched. And so I think it's going up, I guess.
Very cool, thank you.
I guess pretty much what Jeremy said about the development in Hong Kong, because we're both Hong Kong studio here. Definitely the resource issue is a thing here. It's very tough to find developers. I think a lot more companies are going for outsourcing now with like arts or even part of their systems being programmed elsewhere. But in terms of our company, we do tend to want to focus on like the tier 1 countries, but somehow we are limited by what our game genre is right now. It's a Japanese toy car racing game that we are working on, and it's not popular in the States, so it's actually more popular in Southeast Asia, in Asia in general. So Japan, Taiwan, even Indonesia is probably one of our biggest market. So we run into difficulties by publishing in those regions, despite we knowing that they're very popular. So we spent like maybe at least the next 2 years trying to figure out how they are monetized. Like especially Southeast Asia, there's a lot of difficulties actually promoting a game or even monetizing it. For instance, localization is the thing, right? So it's probably the number 1 thing that you should always do, when launching in other country other than your own, right? And then secondly, monetization. So if most of you should know, they don't have a lot of credit cards, right? And they depend heavily on third-party payments. And we learned it like the hard way. Like there's so many people. Like we literally have daily 10 to 20,000 organic users from doing nothing. And we're like, but they're not monetizing at all, right? So what's the problem? And we took a lot of time to figure out what it was. So it was the payment issue, and then later on we fixed the payment. This still isn't Rise, but then we start to look into optimizing our in-app purchases, right? Because later we realized that the transaction that they have through telebilling and all that stuff, they have a limit. So if you charge them a $99 package, they can't pay for that. Right, so instead, we break it down into smaller pieces, like maybe $10, $5, and we saw maybe 200-300% increase in our revenue. So currently, Southeast Asia is definitely big, and it's something that we are actually looking towards developing more into. I mean, other regions are important, but then the first standard in terms of standard marketing, standard monetization, right? But then I think definitely Southeast Asia is something that. Moving forward, what our companies target.
Very cool. Thank you.
Cool. Actually, exactly to your point. So I want to add another point is in Google, especially in Google China, like recent past year, we're hosting a event called Game Connect. That the thought behind that is we see a lot of very talented indie developers, and then we're trying to really grow the communities and the ecosystem. And on the other hand, we also saw a lot of very successful publishers who really struggle to find successful games. So we really want to kind of match the two parties together. So especially within the Asian market, and also for last year we host 3 events in Singapore, in Vietnam, and in Beijing for the Games Connect during major events like China Joy, so that we bring our top publishers and then we bring 30 to 40 indie developers together, and then they can just basically talk about their games there. So create better opportunities. And then in terms of East meet West, this year earlier, we also host an event in Poland where we bring our about 20 different Chinese publishers going to Poland to, because in Google there we also have incubator within Google to really host a group of indie developers trying to really, within the Google's environment and the cultures, trying to grow the better game. So we bring our publisher there and then also host a Game Connect event there too. So it was pretty successful. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
So there were 2 parts to your question, one about developing in the region and one about publishing in the region.
Yes.
Obviously, those are very different answers. So for us, we're a pan-Southeast Asian studio. So we have people in Malaysia, in the Philippines, in Singapore. And so each one of those places is a little different for us. But I would say the overarching feeling for being a developer in Southeast Asia right now is that we continue to fight some old battles for getting quality senior talent because the industry isn't that old in those regions. If I'm in Los Angeles and I want to find a 12-year experienced games programmer, they exist. If I'm in Manila, I know there's 3 of those in the whole city, so you can go hire one of those 3 guys, and you know what, 2 of them own studios. So that's difficult, right? So that's a continuing challenge for us. On the other side, though, there are a lot of young people coming into the industry. A lot of the barriers that used to exist for parents not really supporting people coming into the industry or people not feeling it was a valid career choice, those things are sort of getting taken away, and people are feeling that it's a more viable career option for them. So it's easier for us to get people. But if you're going to be developing in Southeast Asia, even in places like Singapore, Manila, or KL, which have reasonably developed development scenes, you should expect to train a lot. You should expect to be hiring more junior people and putting more money into training those people. You should be using tools to make sure that you're retaining people, because if you're going to put the time and the energy and the money into training people, to have them then immediately skip off to some other studio is kind of a dumb deal. So retention should be a huge thing that you think about in your studios. To the publishing question, I think one of the big mistakes that people make when they talk about Southeast Asia is that they talk about Southeast Asia as though it were sort of a market. And there are two very specific markets in Southeast Asia, and they can be quantified as people who have more money than time and people who have more time than money, right? If I were to take people in, say, a relatively wealthy person in Jakarta or in Singapore or in Manila, somebody who has a professional job and owns a car, they're really not so different than an American user or a European user. They may have slightly different tastes, but the way in which you're going to monetize them, their access to a credit card, the sort of things that you care about are going to be very similar. And so that market actually represents a large amount of the income that people see from those regions because those people have money and they behave in the way that we expect them to behave. But there is another market in Southeast Asia, in many cases people who are living in the same city block as those people who have much lower incomes. It's very normal for somebody in, say, Manila to have $200 a month income. And the way that you're going to monetize that guy versus somebody who has a $5,000 a month income is going to be radically different. That person with a $200 a month income has a lot of time. They're happy to watch your ads. They're happy to play your free games. But if you've got mechanics that count on that person dropping even $5 for an object, $5 for a guy who earned $200 this month and has to pay rent, yeah, he doesn't do that. And you excuse me using he as a gender. That could also be a woman, of course, in our political. Anyway, you get my point.
Yes.
I think you have to, I think more importantly than saying this is the Indonesian market or the Philippine market or even the Indian or African market, or I think you would see more similarity between a low-income user in Africa and Indonesia than you would see between a low-income user and a high-income user that lived within a mile of each other in Manila. And I think that's a thing that people don't get when they think about working in these regions.
Interesting perspective, actually. So what is hot, guys? What news in 2019 are you most excited about? And then we are, obviously, in this session, we are talking more about developers, indie developers in general. So, I mean, what they should be more excited about also.
To me, it's always how small studios, or small games, not small studios, but small games could kind of make it big. Lately, there's a game called Arch Hero. I think that was really good. It's really well monetized, but like, I don't think anyone would have seen it coming, even if it was shown to them. Before it was launched, and it was a breakout success. And I really like these kind of stories because it shows that you don't have to make a mid-core game. You don't have to spend millions on making a game to make millions. And I think that's kind of the draw of this industry and kind of to some people. And I think that's what's interesting. So I'm always looking forward to like what is the next big indie hit, like or mobile indie hit that's coming up.
That's more like a lottery kind of thing. Like even with Arch Hero, like
yeah,
it's nice, right?
If
but
you can
like
find the
once in a
formula
blue
for
moon,
it.
boom, Arch Hero, right? But then tomorrow it's something else. But then it's not your typical.
It's kind of like the Flappy Bird thing. Like one Flappy Bird came out, everybody was like blown away, and then now you have like a million of them. Yeah.
I'd like to respond to this if I could. I heard a really interesting pair of figures, and please don't, quote me on these figures, but I didn't make these figures. I didn't do this research.
That's fine.
A very good friend of mine, Derek Morton, who runs a company called Flowplay in Seattle, was doing some research on how much money is made and how much money is spent in the mobile games industry. And the numbers he found, which I don't stand behind, but the numbers he found were that it was very exciting because the mobile game revenue was $80 billion in last year. And you're like, wow, $80 billion, that's a lot of money. However, the amount of money that was spent to get the users to generate that revenue was $100 billion. Now, I want you to think about that for just a second. We spent, as an industry, if you take the whole industry, we spent $100 billion to make $80 billion. That's kind of stupid, right? And it gets even worse, right? Because that $80 billion worth of revenue, I'm sorry, Mr. Google, that $80 billion worth of revenue, you're going to take 30% of that right off the top because you're paying your Apple tax, you're paying your Google tax, right? That revenue includes the money you guys made, right? So that leaves for, us dumb schmoes that actually made the game $56 billion, right? So we spent $100 billion, because God knows Google's never bought an ad. So we spent, $100 billion to make $56 billion. Right? And so who's winning in this industry? Well, Apple and Google, who've never bought an ad in their lives, well, they made a good solid 30% of that $80 billion. Yay them, right? And Google on the back end, right, because that $100 billion that got bought, hey, look who they bought it from.
But
right?
what
Again, I'm not picking on you. But my point to all of this is a deeply, deeply broken industry.
Now,
right?
what is it that actually you're excited about?
What I'm responding to is I feel sometimes like we're in some sort of dystopian children's novel where like they pick a lottery ticket out and like this one person gets to get out of his life of hell and he gets to live in the nice place. Like the one guy makes Flappy Bird and we all gather around Flappy Bird and we're like, woohoo, see, this is a great industry. But for every one of those dudes, there's 200 people that lost their savings in this joke of an industry, right? So in terms of what I'm not excited about this industry. I have genuinely begun to question my involvement in this industry.
No, actually, and that's a really good point. And then we are going to go back to that in the challenges. And that's really one of the challenges. And I guess if that...
Yes, the entire model being broken would be a challenge, yes.
And if that statistics is correct, I'm not surprised if it is correct, is that but a lot of that spending maybe comes from games that don't really go to the top charts, while actually their revenue actually is basically harvested by the games that actually are on the top charts. So it kind of is not a balanced thing. But Google to respond.
By all means.
I also want to respond to that as well. There's another side to that, right? Because if you're buying mobile game users, they often come from another mobile game. So that 100, like the 100 billion gets spent, gets funneled back.
So what you're explaining there is what we call a pyramid scheme, right? I mean, that's if you're
and you're in it.
I know, right? And at some point you wake up and you say like, wow, I'm in a pyramid scheme and this isn't a great deal. I mean, the day that you realize you're selling Amway, you kind of have to stop yourself for a minute and be like, wait a second. And I think this is a question that doesn't get raised very often in our, let's all pat ourselves on the back about all the revenues we make. Why are we not talking about this?
But think about how your life would change once you sell Amway.
But
exactly that. It's like that scene in Mockingjay, may the luck be with you or whatever, like we're all hoping that we get the one ticket out of this. Most of us don't get the ticket out of this.
Now let's go forward with the discussion because we have a lot of interesting questions for you.
Google's very quiet though.
Yes, actually. Yes.
First of all, I'm a big fan of the Mockingbird movie series, so I understand the whole thing. Well, aside from Google, like personally thinking, I do think the equation there still have room to improve. Like the game revenue we're talking about. It's probably mainly the in-app purchase, but one of the main trends we see here is more and more these hybrid monetization models coming in, where you really blend well with IAP traditionally and with, for example, rewarded videos, which has all the benefit. I mean, I won't gonna repeat all that. Kind of kick it back with a positive loop. Like, yes, you probably get a game from another game, like, frequently, but ultimately if the game is really good qualities and players are really intrigued into that, I mean, right now we have all this information floating around that you can always get attention to some other games. It doesn't matter whether you see an ad or search it from the App Store or just read a blogger. So in the end, it's the essence of that game.
Yeah.
And then how we can really leverage that and unlock all the opportunities, including IPs, including ads. And thinking from the equations, from the spending perspective, not just the game spending. We have a lot of branding spendings as well, like McDonald's, right? So it's all fun into these funnels. It's just sometimes decided on the angles you look at the picture. But I do agree Mockingbird simulations, but I think it's up to for discussions
I'd like to respond
more.
one last thing to what you just said. You used the word fun, right? And I would seriously, I would challenge you. Pull out whatever the brochure is for the conference or any literature for any of these things. How often do you actually hear anyone use the word fun anymore to what we do? We talk about monetization and we talk about loops and we talk about pain points. I've had conversations about pain points. I'm making a product designed to hurt my user until he pays me. And we talk about that like it's a good thing. And now you say, like, well, what am I excited about? You know what I'm excited about? The end of this bullshit, right? I want this to come to
Let
an
me
end.
ask this question, and that's actually my follow-up question. But
No, I'm happy to hear you talk about, wouldn't it be great if we had games that were so fun that they would
I'm
monetize
not gonna
naturally?
let
That'd
you
be
guys
awesome.
off the hook on this question. I mean, so it's gonna be like my next question is kind of relevant. So, what are the biggest opportunities in front of the developers? What are the best platforms and markets of the present and future, and why? And then your take, I would say, mostly was on mobile, but there are lots of different platforms, although not as big. So, I mean, do you want to like take on that one? So, it's just what is it again? Like, if you, and then that's going to be again another question. But if I am a developer, I'm entering the market today. What are the most exciting platforms for me to go? Where should I go actually? So.
I guess. Well, my take is. Like right now, mobile users in general. I'm just talking about mobile because that's what I'm, most experienced in. I think it's get to a point where, the market start to getting saturated to a point where there are actually new genre to be discovered. Games for different demographics, right? Talk about, always like elderlies, right? Probably homosexuals or whatever, right? So there are more opportunity like that where bigger publishers would not do because they're too niche at the beginning, right? And I think for a studio like ours, it's an opportunity to explore something. That's where we survive, right? I mean, the top developers up here, and we're down here, but we're okay. We're okay with that, right? And I think it's something that we should probably start to think about, like now. Right, you talk about within the next 5 years, there's going to be games thanks to Pokemon Go and Candy Crush, you see like your grandma playing Pokemon, right? And there's actually a market for that. Like once they're done with Pokemon, they'll look for other games, right? And that's where we come in eventually, right? And I think this is very exciting that there's going to be different diversity of genre for different demographics, and there could be more survival-wise, be easier for indie developers starting out. So, you don't always have to do like an SLG or like an RPG. This is all been done by the bigger publisher, and that's what they'll be doing for the next 10, 20 years, right? We don't have to go there, right? It's something that we can look elsewhere to survive, right?
To me, it's healthier monetization models for mobile games. I think it's kind of towards the end of its life cycle. Like you said, I don't think loot boxes have that much of a draw as before. Especially if the government clamps down on it some more. I think it's, as developers, we need to come up with better ways and healthier ways for the users to spend. I think because oftentimes those games only a small fraction of the players spend, and like 90-something% of the players don't really spend. I mean, if you can convert more users but have them pay less each, I think that's a better and healthier model carrying forward.
I would... A brief, and bear with me, there's a brief history lesson in this. When we got into games back in we started 16 years ago with our studio, there were a number of publishing platforms. There was iWin and Oberon and Big Fish and a number of places where you could publish your game. And because there were a number, and believe it or not, children, there was a time when publishers paid to make games. I know, it's really hard to believe of this magic land where publishers didn't just take your product, they actually help you build it. Back in those days, one of the reasons you could get a publisher to help pay to build your product was because they had competition and because they wanted exclusive content. If Big Fish wanted your game exclusively on their site, they would pay you to make that game. And that would allow small indie developers to make bigger games, better games, make bigger risky games, because someone was going to take that risk and spread it across the rest of the developers that were working with them in the publishing model in a sane world, right? As that coalesced into fewer and fewer people, those exclusive deals dried up. If we look at the mobile games world right now, yeah, you got two players, right? You got Google, you got Apple, and they don't have to pay you to make games because there's 500 other schmoes out there that'll happily spend their money and put it on that platform. So why would they bother? One of the most exciting places for me right now is to see Epic starting their own store, right? To see competition to Steam. When you see that competition to Steam, and that competition also includes giving the developers a higher royalty share, Steam's going to have to respond to that. How does Steam make sure that they get exclusive content? How do they keep people on their platform? At that point, they have to actually pay us devs something. They have to, whether it's giving us a higher rev share, whether it's helping pay for exclusive content, any of those things changes the model. I would like to see, obviously in China there are a number of app stores. It's not just the two app stores. And there is healthier competition. And I think that's one of the reasons why you're seeing really great content coming out of China, because there is this competitive world where people can't just say, hey, we're Apple and all of the product comes to us, so, tough luck, buddy. This, to me, is what's exciting about platforms. In this world, I am substantially more excited about PC right now than I am about mobile. And I hate to say that at a mobile conference, but it's a healthier
No, actually,
ecosystem.
and that's a pretty good point, and that kind of brings me to the next question, that if you guys were not so heavily invested in mobile and you wanted to start your game company today, where would you go? Would you go to, as you said, like Epic, what Epic is going to bring? Is it going to be instant messaging games? Is it going to be VR, AR? Is it going to be blockchain? Is it going to be voice
If
games?
you were to give
So
me
what-
money to start a mobile game company right now, I would take all of that money over to the Marina Bay Sands and I would put it on black. Because that would be a...
No, but where would you start? That's the question. So where would be, if you were to
I would
start
put it on PC.
Yeah.
I would absolutely put it on PC.
Yeah. So how about you guys?
I would probably, if I had infinite money or a substantial amount of money that I don't have to be responsible for, I would go for VR because I'm interested in it. But if you're asking me, does the VR have a suitable business model behind it? Does it have revenue potential? I don't see it yet. Not yet.
Like if you talk about just current, currently what's going on right now, it's definitely mobile. Like, it's just easier to market, way more ways to monetize your games, and it's so many free marketing that you can get, right? And the cell phone is so easily accessible to a lot of people, right? Compared to like console or PC, right? So definitely.
For us, actually, that has been VR and AR, but as you said correctly, it's like too early in the... So we kind of, our bet is on storytelling in VR. We think that is going to be the killer use case for VR. And but it's going to take time. So for that to pick up is maybe Oculus Quest is the thing, but we are very we are very positive on what it is, but it's maybe like the next gen of VR coming out of Facebook or Apple or someone the next year. So that's kind of, but for us, actually, the most exciting news this year was Oculus Quest. That is at least something at console levels that is very exciting. It's like cheaper. It has good quality. Maybe as they describe it, they say actually that's the last gen of the first, cycle of VR. I think that's how Facebook put it or something like that.
We're actually involved in VR as well. One of my teams actually does location-based VR work.
Okay.
And I'm actually way more excited about location-based VR than I am about consumer VR. There's a lot of hurdles in consumer VR. The biggest one being how small is your house and do you have room to roam around and play this game? There is a very clear usage for location-based VR, and there's some really great products coming out in that. I think that's a very exciting market right now. I'm putting money in it. That's a bet that I'm making with my money.
Great, thank you guys. Now, that kind of, you kind of touched upon this subject before, but I want to go deeper. So mobile, console, or PC for an indie developer, and why? And you mentioned Epic, that's actually a great...
I would actually debate your point that there's so much free marketing and marketing opportunities on mobile. I actually think the marketing opportunities on PC are better. I think there are a lot of people throwing a lot of money trying to get eyeballs for mobile games. And if you want to go out there and compete with Tencent and Supercell for marketing dollars on mobile games, good luck to you. But if you want to go compete with the guys on Steam, I think you get a lot better bang for your buck buying Facebook ads or something like that. I think in terms of what's easier to market bang for your buck for an indie, I would go Steam before I would go mobile.
Very cool. How about you guys?
For me, it depends on what, like, if it's a brand, say if it's a brand new developer, never launched a game before, barely has 2 years of experience, and they want to make a game right. For me, it's going to be mobile just because of, it's not the quantity of games, but basically the quality of games on PC is so high, and it's so hard to compete in that kind of arena that, yes, you could market your game and you could compete, but then the people have like really high standards.
You don't feel that's the case on mobile? I mean, the top 20 games on mobile's barely changed for the last like 4 years.
Yeah, but you don't have to compete with them,
guys.
though. You don't have, and the app stores will happily, feature your app if you're okay, and that comes for free.
Now, guys, I have two follow-up questions there, and to clarify for the audience. So there is a developer I know of that they kind of went for a very small subset of mobile that people, for example, let's say a specific card games, that people actually search for that specific card game. And you have 2-3 competitors there, so you are not really competing with the top chart. At the same time, they have identified based on the competitors, and they started there, and they've become very, very successful on mobile. So that's one question, that maybe one pass to go on mobile. Now, the other question that I would have, and feel free to jump in for any of those, is that when you go to PC, which is another interesting aspect, or even like consoles, what do you think of free-to-play for PC or consoles versus, because mobile actually is, free-to-play is very much common these days, but for console PC, we actually, even for VR high-end, we got bad reviews out of being free-to-play because people wanted to pay once instead of in-app purchase. I mean, so that was kind of there. And then I was wondering, so we are giving something to you for free and you're complaining about it. So it's just, so it was very interesting. So,
I'd like to go back to your earlier point. I think you raised a very interesting and valid and important point. You don't have to compete with everybody in the App Store. You have to compete with the games that look like your game. There was a guy I knew, he was a Russian developer, and he made word games, simple little word games. And he made them for little crappy languages in Eastern Europe that nobody cares about. Like he did like Romanian and Serbian and Croatian word games. And there was nobody else making a Serbian or a Croatian word game. And so he became, by default, the #1 Serbian word game on that app store. And after he had done that across a couple app stores, he now had a number of apps and a number of stores that were #1, which the algorithm loved him. And now as he moved into languages that have more people, he easily raised the charts, and he made millions doing that. So that's a very valid strategy, and I think that's very good advice to a young developer. Don't go out and compete with Supercell. Go out and find a niche that people aren't serving and be the best in that niche. That's very good advice.
Yeah, so, sorry. Yeah, so also want to add to your earlier questions on that, especially this point. So a lot of times we see developers find their niche angles of doing their own successful game. Like the word games you mentioned, another case I saw is this developer is particularly developing this word game for senior female players in the development market for kind of like a mind training games. And then they particularly designed the graphics to really attract to them, like flowers and jungles, and then they carefully tested it. And also the moves, they're trying to kind of simplify it as much as possible and give some useful hint. So users really enjoy that, and they're kind of the #1 on this direct niche point. So, I mean, also if personally thinking that, mobile game got a lot of tensions, but on the other hand, it's also this ecosystem in the mobile world, or like the tools and platform that offer to it is very well comprehensive there for new entrant developers, that they can easily build something with probably a lot more or less cost, aside from the promotion cost. I mean, I'm saying the building the game and design. So from that perspective, also you have all these tensions from all the players, non-traditional players like senior female players, also probably not traditional players, but they probably don't even consider them as a gamer, right? But they entering this market. So from that perspective, I think there's also plenty of opportunities in that sense. Yeah.
We made most of our money off of those exact ladies. We made millions and millions of dollars off of elderly women that wanted to play hidden object games. So that's definitely true.
Yeah, so just want to reinforce what Chris was talking about. So because our company is experiencing this firsthand in terms of like finding the niche market, finding the right topic. So right now with our game Mini Legend, it's a Japanese toy car racing game. No one's doing it, and we're the only one so far for the past 3 years. We're still like the top. If you ever search for Mini for WD, we're always at the top of the list. So it works, definitely works. But then the other thing is, it's hard to find a niche market that sells, right? I mean, there are a lot of niche topics, but then they don't make they're not attractive. They're not, it's really hard. So it's a way, but then you have to be very careful, cautious with what you choose to do.
So one recommendation that I have there actually. Okay, sure. Okay. Okay. So that's sure. So just one way to do that. Actually, we have done it once at least for using Google keyword tool to see what kind of keywords actually have searches, and then go back and see for the ones that they have a lot of searches if they are actually, because they kind of translate from Google search also to other searches, and then basically you can just kind of go and evaluate if you have a lot of competitors there and kind of work on App Store optimization and go from that direction, and then sometimes it works. So that's kind of one thing. And we have a lot of other questions to ask, but yes, exactly.
I don't have anything to add. I really agree with the niche approach. If you're a very small indie studio, I think that's definitely the way to go.
Thank you very much, guys.